Disclaimer: this video is intended for educational purposes only. Any attempt to change any calibration file or actual changes made to your calibration file or any change to an emissions control device is done so at your own risk. I wanted to make a follow-up video to show the process of using dynamic air while tuning the Maf open loop and closed loop and the VVE open loop and closed loop simultaneously. Using this dynamic air method and applying the filters and formulas from my dynamic air video. If you have questions about what those formulas are or what those filters are, I would ask that you watch my dynamic air video that I put out just to avoid putting out duplicate information. I also kind of wanted to put out there setting up these graphs for the Maf closed loop, the Maf open loop, the VVE open loop, the VVE closed loop. It's the same process that you would normally do. There is nothing special about these particular graphs other than the math formulas and the filters that are used. But just to kind of show you how the graphs are set up, we're not going to actually set up the graphs, but you can look at this and then get an idea of how to set them up. So you'll go to graphs layout and we'll go to the Maf closed loop, and you'll see that the parameter is your mass airflow frequency set up in hertz, and your values are going to come from your mass airflow table in the editor. And you'll see as far as the open loop, it's the exact same thing. And the only thing that changes between the two are the filters, which I go over in my previous video. And then if you wanted to see how the VVE graph is set up, you have the math formula along with the filter that is in the previous video. For your column axis, you would use engine speed, the same as you normally would for a VVE graph. You would get your data from the top of the VVE table, and the row axis is, I have here, it's map divided by Barrow. This is, I guess you could say, a custom math formula, but it's the exact same as the P ratio parameter that's already available on HB tuners for Gen 5 vehicles. And just to show you again, the open loop version of the VVE graph, the column axis is engine speed, and the row axis is the map divided by Barrow, which is the same as the P ratio that I mentioned. Okay, so once you have your graph set up, what you'll need to do, obviously, is do a drive log. And just to show you in the VVE editor what is turned on and what is turned off, just to kind of avoid confusion on that, I'll go ahead and show you that now. Okay, so in the editor, you would go to engine, fuel, oxygen sensors. You can see that the oxygen, the O2 sensors are on. They don't have a negative value. LTFTs are off. Right here, your long-term fuel trims. And you'll see that it says LTFT learn is disabled below this engine coolant temperature. And then the max ECT, long-term fuel trims, are disabled above this coolant temperature. If you go to engine fuel cutoff DFCO, I didn't mention this in the last video, I put it in the description, but DFCO needs to be turned off just because for some reason it seems to find a way around the filter. Right here where it says enable RPM, we have that at 8,191. So above this engine speed, DFCO will be allowed. And then disable RPM is set to 8,190. Below this engine speed, DFCO will be disabled. And for the DFCOs, I take it one step further. So right here where it says vehicle speed, the enable speed, I have that maxed out. Both of these, normal and eco mode, are maxed out. And then on the disable speed, just have it one below the maxed out. So for the enable speed, it would be 318. For the disable speed, it would be 317 across the board. Additionally, if you have a manual car, you will need to shut off or turn off your CFCO. So you would enable the VSS at 318 and then enable RPM right here, 8,192. And it says RPM must be above this value to enable CFCO. And if you haven't, lean fuel saving, DOD disable, One thing I didn't mention in my other video, obviously if you're tuning just so that you don't have skewed results on additional fueling, make sure your catalyst protection, your catalyst overtemp is disabled. And as far as your dynamic air, you can see that is left stock. You don't have to change this at all. And then if we jump up here to engine diagnostics, airflow, you'll see that my MAF is not failed. It's fully operational. None of the DTCs are disabled. Everything, unless said otherwise, is left on. So the only thing that we have turned off is DFCO, catalyst overtemp, and long-term fuel trims. So to clarify on that, anything that you would normally turn off, say if you're trying to disable the MAF or you're trying to tune for speed density and then tune MAF, you don't have to do any of that. You basically leave it as it is, and the only thing that you would adjust, like I said, is DFCO. You would disable that, disable your LTFTs, and disable catalyst overtemp. Okay, we will head back to the scanner and I'll show you how to essentially copy and paste from the scanner to the editor using the dynamic air open loop and closed loop graphs, both for the MAF and for the VVE. When using this method, one of the first things that you're going to need to know is when your power enrichment comes on. You can go to the editor. You would go to engine, fuel, power enrich, and I have mine same as the last video. I have mine set to come on roughly about 2,500 RPMs. Another way that you can do this after you have your power enrich set up, go back to the scanner and you can scrub your logs. And if you'll notice in my channels, I have power enrichment displaying whether it's either on or off, and I have closed loop active displaying whether it's on or off. This will help you whenever you are trying to use your filters for the MAF. So what you will do, just go ahead and minimize this right here. So we're going to select MAF closed loop. We're going to bring this back to where the log started, which was started from an idle start, and you can scrub the logs. So we're not in power enrichment at idle, and we are in closed loop at idle. So you will scrub through this log. It's easier just to grab this tab right here. You're going to watch where it says power enrichment off, closed loop active, yes. You're just going to keep scrolling till you see those change. Right there. Then to fine tune it, we'll go to this wide open throttle pull. And if you grab this line right here, you'll see where it changes right there. So on your MAF frequency, you know roughly about 2,500 RPMs and 4,562 Hertz, we are no longer in closed loop and our power enrichment is on. So once you have that information, so we will make a mental note of this 4,562 Hertz. And because we're in MAF closed loop, we know that the closed loop fuel trims, as far as the MAF is concerned, is going to be from this 4,562 Hertz below. So what we will do is go from this 4,562 Hertz, and we will select downwards to this 2169 number. I am not going to select this value right here. I don't feel like it's a valid number, most likely an outlier. And if it's not, we'll catch it on the next log. So you would right click, copy, go to your editor. You want to go to engine, airflow, and then your airflow versus frequency. You're going to scroll through this, and you're going to find that 2169 number that we highlighted. We're going to highlight from 2169 all the way to 4562. And that 4562 number is where we determined that the closed loop fuel trims would not be active after that cell. So in the editor, we have 2169 selected and highlighted all the way to 4562. Right click, paste special, multiply by half. Then we will go back to the scanner. We're going to do the same thing but in open loop. And we determined that the 4,562 Hertz is the cell that closed loop trims. After that value, closed loop is no longer active. So we'll take 4650, which is the next cell over. We're going to highlight all the way up until the data stops. Right click, copy, back to your editor, go to this 4650, right click, paste special, multiply by half. We'll bring our math table up so that we can make adjustments. Obviously, there were cells that we didn't hit that will make this math curve look incorrect. On this particular car, this is an NA car. There are certain cells of the math with an NA car that you will never hit. This math is rescaled in the event that this customer wants to put a supercharger or a turbocharger on. So that's why you see the Hertz values go up above 10,000 in this instance. But in this case, even in a wide open pool, they are barely touching 8,333 Hertz. So we still have a ways to go. For the sake of this video, I'll just go ahead and interpolate from 8,167 Hertz up, just to give you a better idea of what the math curve should look like. You don't have to do that. I just did that for the sake of this video. Again, in this case, these numbers here, you'll never see these numbers naturally aspirated. You'll never see this many Hertz or grams of airflow being used in a naturally aspirated vehicle. So then what you would want to do, click the box at the top. You're going to smooth one time, and that's going to get rid of this bump, this bump, this bump. It'll make it a smooth linear line. So you'll smooth one time. See how all of that is nice and linear. Now we'll go back to the scanner. So we have effectively, for a first run, just for the math only, we've done closed loop and open loop filtering. So we've done both sides of the math curve using these formulas and these filters. For the next part, you'll do the VVE closed loop using Dynair and the VVE open loop using Dynair. I will go over that briefly, but it is the exact same as what I've shown in my previous video, showing you how to use the VVE Assistant. Okay, so now what you want to do is go to your VVE Assistant and set that up just like I showed. You would want to go in and update your zone numbers. You would want to go in and update your histograms. And again, I'm just showing you, if you need to know exactly how to do this, I go over in depth in my other video how to set up the VVE Assistant and how to use it. Once you have your open loop and your closed loop VVE dynamic air histograms copied over to VVE Assistant, you would go to the VVE old input. You would go to your editor, go up here to edit virtual volumetric efficiency table. You would copy this with axis, copy with axis, paste that into your old input. You would also paste it into your new input because you're starting a new session with the VVE Assistant tool. So once you've pasted both of these over, you go to the VVE Paste Special. You would go through and each of these rows, you would do the Control G function, which I discuss in my other video. If you watched my other video, I go over how to set this up using the Control G function. I'm not going to go over that in this video, but if you need a reference, you can look back and watch the other video, and it goes over how to set this up. Once you have these rows filled in, columns rather, once you have these columns filled in, right click, copy without axis, copies the whole table. You will go back to your virtual volumetric efficiency table. So once you're in here, manifold switch open, paste special, multiply by percent, calculate coefficients, smooth it one time, calculate coefficients. And then each time you do this, you want to copy this table into your closed loop table. Go back to your manifold switch open, right click, copy with axis, go back to the tool, and you'll repeat that process until these values get to a desirable percentage, usually between plus and minus 5%. You can keep using this tool until you get closer to, say, plus or minus 1%. Like I said in my previous video, from the factory, they are pretty much plus or minus 10%, and they seem to be pretty efficient on a stock car from the factory at plus or minus 10%. So if you can get it plus or minus 5% or plus or minus 3%, you're doing great. I will say that with this tool, you'll reach a point to where you're doing the whole copy paste special in the VVE editor, and then coming back to this, and you'll notice that the values in this table get to a point to where they don't change quite as much. At that point, when you see that kind of get stagnant, that's kind of I use that as a clue to let's do another drive log. And then when you do another drive log, you'll do this whole process all over again. The math is usually pretty dialed in after about 3 runs, 3 drive logs. But each time you do a drive log and you need to tune the math, you'll do exactly what we did at the beginning of this video with your closed loop and open loop math dynamic air. And you'll do the same thing with the VVE closed loop and VVE open loop dynamic air. One thing to note, whenever you're using this method, every time that you use this tool is a drive that you didn't have to make. Typically, when you would do your VVE tuning, every time that you calculate coefficients in the virtual volumetric efficiency editor, each time that you would calculate coefficients, you got to do another drive. This tool minimizes drive time that's necessary to get your VVE and math dialed in. I hope this video helps to clarify any issues that you might have had or misunderstandings you might have had on how this works. The formulas and the filters are long and complicated, but the process is pretty simple. You don't have to turn anything off other than the things that we mentioned: DFCO, CFCO if it's a manual car, long-term fuel trims, and then your catalyst overtemp. Those are the only things that you have to change in the calibration file as far as setting it up to be able to tune this way. Again, thanks for watching. I hope this helps, and we will see you on the next one.